the signal if you're ready. That's our signal. The recording is in progress, so we're about to start. Right? Are you ready to go? Lots of community partners in the room. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And we'll again, thank you for your patience as we allow folks into the room. You are joining us this afternoon for our summer fourth session of our Data for Change initiative. And today we have the pleasure of welcoming Sophia Mehta from Logical Outcomes to talk a little bit about the survey designed for everyone collecting participant data. They'll be presenting and going in further depth from their last session. And so we're going to welcome them shortly. But before we do, I'm just going to ask for the PowerPoint to start. And we're going to start shortly. There we go. And if you've joined us before, I often do a little bit of a preamble in the front end just to kind of contextualize who we are and why you're here and the initiative in general. And then I'll shortly pass it over to our presenters to walk us through today's learnings. But if you're joining us for the first time, my name is Kosel Key. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships here at Find Help 211. Find Help has been hosting these sessions and really convening and socializing data for change in our community social services sector. And so welcome if this is your first time. If this is not your first time, if you've been joining us on this series, thank you again for joining us and continuing to participate in this journey with us. Next slide, please. As you see, this project overall is taking course of the whole year. We are here to really learn about to collect social identity data, so which we're coining as SID there, and as you see in front of you. And our purpose for Data for Change is really threefold: to collect social identity data as a community social services sector. These are free workshops for our sector to come together to learn collectively, to ask the questions, to ask some of the challenges that we're all going through, and how do we collect and learn together. To start to use the data for our agencies at a very agency level so that we can begin to advance better outcomes for the communities that we serve. And the only way we could do that is understanding the community that we serve and begin to collect the data so we can collectively articulate who we serve and how we serve them. So, and then 3, we have tools and resources and methodologies suggesting that we are hoping that many of you can begin to socialize in your own agencies and across our sector. So that's really the 3 folds of the goal, is to collect, to begin to use it collectively, and to socialize similar tools across our sector. Next slide, please. This is our 3rd iteration, and as every iteration and every year that we do this, we are always building on the feedback of our sector partners. And our partners have told us, and we need something out of a community of practice. We need a landing page where all the learnings are coming, and we can learn together on a static page and pull down data. And then how do we continue to reinforce and strengthen our capacity building sessions? So what you have in front of you is our new model, which is bringing in community partners like CASA to help facilitate a community of practice table. We have SHIP, who is helping facilitate and showcasing how an agency does data collection in their own agency and how they practice some of their best practices and are showcasing some of their work. And we have Logical Outcomes, who does work with across our community social services and understands the needs of data and then the needs of our community social services sector and is showcasing how to do this work. So we have capacity building, we have community of practice, and then on the side there, Find Help 211 hosts a knowledge mobilization hub that allows folks to kind of go back to a page where resources are landing. Next page. And our series is designed in a way with community in mind and with feedback from community as very natural stages of how data is collected. And we are now currently on stage 2, collect and store. And so we just wanted to share that with you. And if you're joining us for further sessions, it's going to be a natural progression of how data is collected. The next stage. And then finally, we just wanted to remind folks that these series are often complex with complex discussions. So please continue to have self-care and well-being as you're going through our capacity building series. to pace yourself, to step away from the work as you need, to practice self-care, whatever that looks like for you, and to understand that we're all in this collective journey of collecting data. And so it's not easy. We understand it's tough work. So as you need, please step away if you need to, but we will not be putting in natural breaks, but rather please figure out breaks for yourself and as you need. And then everything here is recorded. When you do take a break, you can always come back to these sessions. It's going to be on our page. Next page, please. So this is the page where we're going to encourage folks, as whether you've missed previous sessions or you want to catch up if you can't make it to all the sessions. The dataforchange.ca is a page you can always visit and get materials. So feel free to register there as well at upcoming workshops. That is there. The video recordings of sessions of today. The tools that we speak about will also be uploaded there. And then we have things that you can sign up for just to kind of continue to keep you in the loop. And then finally, that's my part. And so I will now pass it on to the fun part of the day, which is bringing on Sophie and Meta to walk us through their session. And again, welcome to the both of you, and thank you. And we look forward to your presentation today.
Thank you, Kausal, and I found your part fun as well.
I tried.
Meta, I realized that we didn't talk about when we'd introduce ourselves. Why don't we just start with an introduction and then we'll go into the land acknowledgement and we'll talk a little bit about logical outcomes and move into our presentation. So I can lead. My name is Sophie Llewellyn, and I am the Director of Evaluation with Logical Outcomes. I've been working in the sector very closely with nonprofits for many years, and I'm super jazzed to be here today.
Hi everyone, my name is Medha. I work with Sophie at Logical Outcomes as a Research and Evaluation Associate, also working with a range of nonprofits across different sectors to work on evaluation and research needs. And also really excited about being here and meeting everybody today. It's a really nice big group, so I'm really looking forward for a lot of conversation and learning from each other.
Mm-hmm. Likewise. Okay, so Logical Outcomes is based in Toronto on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. As people who live and work in this place, we acknowledge our responsibility to respect and uphold the treaties that govern this land, and these include Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We also recognize the enduring relevance of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement, which is a treaty between Indigenous nations in the Great Lakes region that binds the peoples who inhabit this land to share it well and protect it. Okay, just a little bit about Logical Outcomes. We are a Canadian registered nonprofit with a mission to build evaluation and learning capacity. So we offer research and evaluation services. We build monitoring, evaluation, and learning systems. We deliver evaluation coaching and capacity building. And increasingly, we're getting into offering AI solutions for nonprofits. And as evaluators, I want to say that we're very much applied researchers. We are practitioners rather than experts in survey methodology. So I'm hoping that the presentation that we prepared today is going to be useful for folks, that it's pitched at the right level. And I'm also hoping that we'll have an opportunity to learn from some of the folks on the call as well, who I'm sure have expertise in some areas that go beyond mine and Medha's. Medha, do you want to take the slide? Or I can. I see your name on it.
Go for it.
Okay, so what we'll cover today, we just want to talk about our main goal for the workshop first, and then get into talking about surveys. The workshop is about survey design, but surveys are just one kind of form that you can use to gather data. So we want to talk about the question of what is a survey and when should you use one. We'll get into the anatomy of a survey, so its various parts, how to choose what we call outcomes and process measures in evaluation, then into socio-demographic measures, which is kind of the meat and potatoes of the workshop today. We want to have a breakout room discussion to understand the big questions that drive your social identity data collection, as well as the successes that you've achieved and the challenges that you have faced or continue to face in collecting data. And coming out of that just 10-minute discussion, we want to hear from you so that we can all learn from one another. Then we'll get into just a technical piece around considerations for selecting a survey platform. And we have a number of resources that we want to share that we pulled from in preparing today's presentation. And so we can, those will be available in the slide deck that gets posted and shared. Okay, so our goal very simply is to support nonprofits to collect data from their participants and who receive their services in a way that's equitable, pragmatic, and secure. And so to that end, today we're going to be focused on data collection through surveys and online forms, and talking a little bit about criteria for choosing a system that can support that data collection. Before we get into what is a survey and all of that, we want to just revisit the principles for equitable data practice that we looked at in our last workshop back in April, I think. So every stage of these, I just want to mention, these are from the Urban Institute, and we've shared this, we'll share this resource as part of the slide deck. I really like this resource a lot. And they remind us that each stage of the data lifecycle provides an opportunity to pursue an equitable, community-centered approach to data by maximizing participant benefits and minimizing risks in data collection, ensuring respect for people and communities whom we serve, and promoting justice in part by minimizing the burden for the people who are sharing their data with our organizations and for frontline staff. So these are principles that we return to again and again in our own practice as evaluators when we're making decisions about how to collect and store and interpret and share and report on data. And we'll come back to them in the presentation. Okay, so what is a survey? This is a definition from Caroline Jarrett, whose Surveys That Work book I like quite a lot. So a survey is a process of asking questions that are answered by a sample of a defined group of people to get numbers that you can use to make decisions. Oh, now I have to go look at my notes. Hold on a second. What I like about this definition is its focus on, first of all, a process. A survey, yes, it's a tool, but it's something that we need to plan carefully with the people who are most important to this given process. It's all about asking questions that get answered, ideally by just a sample of the group of people, in this case, whom you serve. That's a way to reduce the burden of data collection by potentially just asking a sample of people to answer your questions. Surveys get numbers that you can use to make decisions. So surveys are a great way to hear from a lot of people who can provide you with the numbers that you need to justify or provide evidence on the basis on which you can make decisions. But it's all about making decisions. Now, I know that surveys can also be used for qualitative research, and myself, that's my background. It's in qualitative research. At Logical Outcomes, we like to ask open-ended, not a lot, but a couple of open-ended questions in many of our surveys. But still, the kinds of qualitative data that you can expect to receive from a survey, they tend to be a little more superficial, more about like the how, less about the why, than what you would get from an interview, a group interview, or an interpersonal interview, for example. And they also, that qualitative data that you get from an open text question, it's also countable in a way that interview data rarely is. So we just wanted to compare social identity data collection via a survey with data collection via an intake form, because they're they're very similar tools, and you may even use the same basic system for both of them, but they're slightly different considerations. They have different strengths and weaknesses, and when we're using a survey, we might want to collect a little less social identity data, for example, than we would in an intake form. And one of the reasons for that is that an intake form is something that generally gets filled in once by every person who you serve. And so if you want to understand the population that your organization serves, that your program serves, and that's your opportunity to ask several questions, several social identity questions like age and gender and indigenous identity and et cetera. We're going to get into that later. But with a survey, often a survey, you may have a post data collection schedule. You may use surveys in an ad hoc way. It tends to be, for the most part, a more lightweight measure. And while we do want to collect social identity data often, although not always, in our surveys, so that, for example, we can disaggregate the data and understand the experiences and outcomes that are had by different population groups. We tend to ask fewer social identity questions in your average survey than we might in an intake form. Meta, do you want to add anything in here about the distinction between the survey and the CMS and forms?
No, I think you got like the basic crux is exactly that, that you're going to ask questions. If you ask social identity questions, they're going to be more purpose driven based on the question you're answering through the survey. So based on your larger research question, you would pick and choose what social identity data you want to collect versus an intake form, which is, like Sophie said, typically a much longer form which people fill only once, which has all of the information that you would need to provide services to them. So it's nice to make this distinction because as you plan your survey, you're not thinking about, oh, what is, you know, some of us might think, oh, we should have all the questions there, but that doesn't have to be the case. Yeah.
That's right. And if you have a more sophisticated system, you may actually be able to link survey responses to an individual's demographic data by way of, let's say, a participant ID, so that you don't have to ask them all of these questions every time you hear from them via survey. Instead, you can pull up the data from your client management system. I mean, we all wish that we had a system that worked like that. Some of us do, many of us don't, but that's an example. And there are some strengths, obviously, of pulling in this data through an intake form, and the way that you can use that data is quite different. So you can, with an intake form, you're looking at understanding an individual's context, who they are, where they live, for example, et cetera, so that you can direct them to services that are relevant to them. So there's that benefit from collecting demographic data on your intake form that you wouldn't generally have on a survey, which is much more likely to be an anonymous instrument used to understand trends across the population you serve, for example. And Svetlana has raised her hand.
Yes, thank you. I just wonder if clients are aware that we are collecting information about them, or they give the consent at which stage it's happened.
That's a great question, and that's something that both the intake form and the survey have in common. You need a consent process that's really clear. So in both cases, we start with informed consent, and I think that's coming up shortly. That's a great question. Okay, shall we move on? Okay, so when should you use a survey? Too often in our experience, people will reach for a survey, like we're going to do a survey, before they take time to clarify the larger questions that they want to ask. So they're often we'll kind of put the cart before the horse. We start with the method rather than the question. But really the first step in any data project has to be clarifying the big question that you want to answer, and that is your research question. And a research question, it's quite different from a survey question. This is the question that drives your investigation. Once you've clarified this question, then you consider which methods are best suited to answering it and whether or not a survey is the right tool to use. So this again is from Caroline Jarrett. So we can test our research questions by asking ourselves, can they be framed in this way? We need to ask this group of people this specific question so that we, or maybe someone else, can decide X, can decide which action to take. So this, I find this framing very helpful in looking at my own research questions and ensuring that I'm really clear on the reason that I'm asking them. And the reason is always to make a decision. Sometimes it's the organization that is administering the survey that's going to be making the decision. Sometimes it's your funder, or sometimes it may be that the question is really important to the community that you serve, and you have a council that wants to make a decision on the basis of the information gathered from the survey. But it always needs to be a decision that drives your data projects. I have some examples here, actually. Hold on one second. So for example, we need to ask the people whom we serve which languages they prefer to communicate in so that we can decide which translators to bring in. That's an obvious one. Or we need to ask the people we serve about their age, gender, sexual orientation, and race so that we can identify and address any barriers that may be keeping key population groups from getting the most out of our programs. We can actually change our programming so that it better meets the goals of those communities. So those are some examples. Okay, so common research questions. In nonprofit program evaluation, we typically pose we call them evaluation questions, but they're research questions. We pose big questions like, who does the program serve? Is the program reaching its intended population? What goals do people bring to the program, and to what extent is the program supporting them to achieve these goals? How might we improve the program's design and or delivery to better support participants to achieve their goals? And so if we are asking ourselves whether or not we should run a survey, well, actually, we thought it would be interesting to hear from folks in the room. Which methods would you use to answer these questions? So you can use chat, or you can just unmute and we'll have a little conversation. We could start with question 1.
I think question 1 is hard because how do you get it to the intended population to make sure that they can say no? You know what I mean? Like it's when you ask who the program serves, you're sort of asking who it doesn't serve, but you can't ask who it doesn't serve because you're not in contact with those people.
That is a really good point. You can ask the people with whom you're in contact. You can ask them some questions about themselves to figure out, first of all, we need to have an intended population. We need to be clear about who is the program's intended population, right? So you can ask people about their identities and figure out what is the match here and where are the gaps. So that's one way that I would do it as an evaluator. But you're right that you cannot ask the people who have not come to the program about themselves. And so what method do we use to do that? One method might be a survey that goes out to the people participating in the program, but maybe a more elegant method, if you have the capability, is your CMS, your client management system. So looking at the data that you've taken in at intake from the folks who are participating in your program, and analyzing that data against the population who you're hoping to reach. And I've done this, for example, working with settlement agencies who have funding from IRCC to provide programming to specific groups of people who have certain immigration statuses, right? But the need is much greater. And so the program provision generally exceeds the target population there.
Understood.
That's great, Rachel. Thank you. Dina?
Hi, I'm sorry, I was trying to get my audio. So I'm a bit, I guess this is following up a bit on Rachel's point about we can't survey who we don't survey. And it's just maybe sharing something that happened which compares the survey to the intake form. And so we did a survey in the past, so I won't name the survey or anything, but we also looked at the intake forms. And so we noticed something in the responses we were getting, which was that, like, let's just say for argument's sake, 100 people did an intake form, and in that 100 people, 70 of them were female and 30 of them were male. But then when we got the responses from the survey, the vast majority of the responses were male, not female.
Oh, wow.
So it gave us like information to actually think, okay, we need another method of going back to get that information from the actual key population that we're serving to find out like why they're not responding. So it was an interesting point that I thought of it actually when you presented intake and survey, but I thought I would bring it up here since this question was raised.
That's fantastic. Is really interesting to hear, and that's a good reason to gather socio-demographic data in your survey to figure out who is filling in this survey and is it a representative sample? And in that case, it sounds like it wasn't the sample of folks who are filling it in were not representative of the group who you serve, and so you needed to find alternate ways of hearing from the women who you're serving.
Exactly.
It's really interesting. Shall we go to the next question about what goals, or Nicole, you've got your hand up. Oh, but you're muted. Oh.
There we go. Sorry, my headset's very finicky sometimes. It just really goes to show the unique perspective when we're asking the information or making those offers about learning people's identities and creating that welcoming space, that it also gives us good information of who we're not serving, who's not at the table, and utilizing different tools like dashboards or analytics of those intake forms to then look at, can we broaden the scope of our work, or do we need to tap into partnerships or whatnot? So just wanted to highlight that there.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah, and if we're really not seeing that the community who we're aiming to serve is coming into our doors, how do we go out, as you say, through our networks? How do we reach? What kind of outreach do we need to do in order to let people know about our services and start to win their trust as well? Encourage them to come in. It's good. I want to ask about the goals, if people have ideas about how you would collect that data. And there's just a question in the chat about sharing the presentation, and we will be sharing the presentation on the Data for Change site. And I'm sure Keishon maybe can put in that information again in case folks who are joining late aren't able to access all of the chat.
Somebody responded in the chat saying that you could, through the client intake, to understand their initial goals. So Alexandra said that that would be a way to understand their goals, and then a follow-up survey throughout service. So the client intake and then a survey.
I love that idea. That is fantastic. And what I might want to do is start off by asking people about their goals, learning what are the most common goals through the first time that you run a program, and then potentially putting those goals into your system, or else it's an open text question that you include in your client management system that people are asked to fill out at the beginning. And that's a wonderful way to prepare as well. If you're having folks fill in their goals at registration, then as somebody who is offering a program, you can see what those goals are. Ask yourself to what extent they line up with the goals that you have for the program, and prepare to, maybe adjust your program delivery somewhat to meet people's goals.
I think if you have the ability to collect baseline data and then compare that with post-program data, that's really helpful. Like, for example, in language training, we use our Canadian language benchmarks for that.
Yes. That's for sure. Yes, if you're able to do that, and then you can see the change that people have achieved as a result of the program that you're offering. That's the gold standard, Carol.
Yeah, I know it's not as easy for all program areas for sure. Yeah. Sometimes getting that baseline data or even identifying that baseline data can be really challenging.
Yeah, but you're right that it's when you have that data, it's very rich and you can learn a lot from it. Another way you can find out if people have achieved their goals is just by asking them. So we don't always have to run a survey. We can also have a group discussion towards the end of our program. We could ask people to do a personal reflection, spend a couple of minutes thinking about the goals they brought in, whether or not they achieved those goals, how those goals might have changed over time. It all depends on the nature of the program that you're providing, of course, whether that's going to work for folks. But just broadening it out as a qualitative researcher, I want to offer other methods.
There's a comment in the chat, Sophie.
Okay, we use scaling questions to measure change. Like what does 10 look like for them and what would help them move up the scale? That's great. That's really interesting. Allison, do you want to share more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I work in child well-being, child protection, and most agencies in Ontario have adopted a framework called Signs of Safety, and it's really focused. It's a balanced assessment framework. So it's I think historically child protection has been sort of deficit-based, and we're looking to really balance that out with family strengths and what works well and who's involved to help them. But one of the things that we use is a scaling question. And so we scale things, for example, like child safety. So how would and we ask like different people, because the number is sort of irrelevant. It's more the why you're at that number that's meaningful. And so where does everyone see the situation? So we ask them to scale, and then what would move them up the scale. So 10 is like the where the child is very safe, and 0 is we're extremely worried. And so it's just like a temperature of where does everyone kind of see things where they're at right now, and what do they think they need to move up 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, half a point, right? So it's really that's how we kind of like the goal is sort of agreed upon by the family, our agency, the family's network, and then how do we get to from like say a 4 up to the it might not always be a 10, but even up to like an 8 or a 9, where we can kind of say, okay, this is a safe situation.
That sounds like a really interesting instrument. I'll look that up.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing it. And it sounds like that's something that you do on an individual basis as part of your case management process. And so you'd keep track
Exactly.
of that. And then I guess you could aggregate that data if it makes sense to do that. But it may or may not based on what you're saying.
Exactly. So you've hit the nail on the head, Sophie. Sometimes it really does help to aggregate it. And because we do scaling even so like I run trainings that were like for like sort of internally, and we kind of look at participants before and after, how where they scale themselves before the training. So like and then after the training. So like what was the improvement sort of overall? Because you can get a ton of numbers when you have a lot of participants. So like what's the average of that? And then how did we move that average up or not? And then how does the feedback that we like their written feedback reflect that? And then it gives us like a temperature of how we're doing and how we need to adjust the training.
That's
Same
great.
with
You're
same with
also
client work as well. Yeah.
Yeah, you're doing triangulation as well there because it sounds
Yeah,
like you're hearing from people and asking yourself, how does this square against what we're seeing with the change
exactly.
in the ratings, and the qualitative information you're getting is enriching your understanding of the change. That is so cool. I feel like we should keep going because I know we've got 38 slides to get through, although we're halfway there. That's exciting. The last question, maybe I'll give some answers here. Might we improve the program's design and or delivery to better support participants to achieve their goals? This is kind of a big question, but one of the ways here we might use a survey. We could use just a suggestion poll, like a really simple survey that's available for participants to fill in anytime that basically asks how can we improve our services, so that we can hear from clients about their ideas. We could also put that question in a longer survey that asks about outcomes and gather socio-demographic data as well. And we can ask staff and other people who are engaged in the program for their ideas. There are also we can also look at the literature and see what are the program designs that are out there that are evidence-based, what's new, what's changing in our sector that we might want to try to improve our program in specific ways. Just some ideas there.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly add that, like you said, like when we use different methods and actually use triangulation, it also helps to not put too much sort of pressure on one survey to give you all the answers. And you might like think that, oh, I need to have a long survey that everybody fills out so I can answer these questions. But if you actually use multiple methods, you could have a survey that's more lightweight. And you can use other methods like interviews or group discussions, like talking to your staff, etc., to actually get some of those deeper questions and engage maybe like a smaller representative sample to answer those questions, rather than putting everything in a survey and expecting, people to go through that and give you all the answers you need. So it's nice to actually use mixed methods to answer, I would say, most of these questions.
That's really helpful, Meta. That's a really important point.
Okay, so the next bit we're going to talk about is the anatomy of a survey, basically the different parts of a survey and how we like to structure surveys. And the first thing is the survey should be short and questions organized in a logical flow. The short thing again goes back to one of the principles we discussed about minimizing the burden of data collection, right? Not just on the people who are filling the survey, but also on the people who are administering the survey and will be analyzing the data. So you really want to keep it short. You want to keep it accessible, simple. We always start with informed consent, like Sophie mentioned, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that typically looks like, what all it should have. Starting off with general questions that are easier to answer, right? Because obviously you don't want to scare people off. So questions that apply to everybody, that are easy to answer, often it's like multiple choice or more fact-based questions that people shouldn't have should need to put a lot of effort answering. And then coming to maybe some harder questions, maybe some open text that require people to put in more effort, maybe do more reflection, thinking to be able to answer. Social demographic questions are also hard questions, so we also like to put them towards the end. And we always make them optional, as much as possible, have them be optional questions. So again, towards the end, also clearly specific, kind of stating again why these questions are being asked. So just a couple of lines about why we ask these questions and the fact that they are optional and people can skip them if they wish. The last thing is the submission and the post-submission page. And we've put this separately because we also feel like this is an important part of a survey. You can use the post-submission page to, of course, thank people for participating, but also share resources with them that they might want to access for support. Give the contact information again of a person they could reach out to if they have questions about the survey or their data or how it's going to be used. Or any other important thing you want to kind of leave them with, like guide them to your website or just, anywhere they could go for support. And the submission as well. So this will vary per survey platform. Often in some survey platforms, if somebody started a survey but they didn't finish it, their data doesn't get recorded. But in some survey platforms, like the one that we use, if someone has started a survey but then decided halfway they don't want to finish it, the data is still recorded. But we take the submission as the sign of informed consent. So if someone started a survey but never finished it, we take that as the fact that we don't have that consent to take that data. So we discard that data. So that's also really important for someone to actually press submit to say that, yes, I am sharing my data with you, is also a very important part. Did I miss anything, Sophie?
No, that's fantastic. I just wanted to add something about the post-submission page that can be, if you are providing incentives for folks to compensate people for their time in filling in a survey and sharing their data with you. The post-submission page is a nice place to provide a link to sign up to receive the gift card or whatever it is. So you can take them from the survey to a separate form, maybe even in a totally separate system where they can enter enter their email address so that they can then receive the gift card. That way, their survey response remains anonymous. It's not tied to an email address that you might need in order to get them the gift card. It's something that we do fairly often, so I just thought I would mention that. And I see Carol has her hand up.
Oh yeah, I was just very interested to see that you had the socio-demographic questions after the general and harder questions, because I see a lot of surveys with the demographic information at the front. So I was just curious about the rationale for that.
It's because they're hard questions. So they're hard questions because they're very personal. They ask us about intimate aspects of our lives, like our sexual orientation and our race and our gender, etc. And so for that reason, we like to allow people to kind of warm up with some easier questions like, how did you learn about our program? And then ask them the questions they have to think more about a little bit, and put those questions, the socio-demographic questions, at the end when they're almost done. Just one more push and you can hit the submit button. That's our approach. But you're right that sometimes I see them at the beginning of a survey, but I often feel like, we don't even know each other yet, and you're asking me about my sexual orientation already. So I don't know. That's our preference.
Okay, no, that's really interesting and it's useful. Thank you.
And I see Samantha saying that even if you click on I consent, but then they don't finish the survey, is it true that we consider consent wasn't submitted? I do, because at Logical Outcomes, yes, that is our practice, because we say in our consent form, you can exit the survey at any time. It's really important when we're doing research with human, or even evaluation research with people, that we say, you can stop doing this anytime. You can exit the survey. And while in our platform, our survey platform, if you click exit and clear your survey, the survey platform doesn't retain any data, so we never even saw that the person was in the platform. A lot of people will just close their browser window, and then we still have all their data, but they've decided that for whatever reason that they don't want to submit the survey. And so we just respect that by excluding the data from our data set, which is sometimes hard to do. Obviously we want a good response rate. We want to use the data that people share, but we just don't count that data as being fully shared. And that, again, may not be the industry standard. It's what we do, though.
Thanks, Sophie. Okay, so talking about consent. And consent really is a process, and data collection begins with consent. So our consent form typically will explain why the data are being collected and how they're going to be used. What is expected of the respondents, so maybe like how long the survey is going to take, what kind of questions they're expected to answer, any risks or benefits that they might have by filling the survey, who has access to the data. Again, the fact that it is voluntary, so they have the right to not fill the form, to decline participation. And like Sophie said, they also have the right to stop participating at any time if they feel like, okay, they started, but they don't want to do it anymore. That's okay, they can stop. And very importantly, who to contact for more information, or if they want to withdraw their consent, giving them the guideline of that, like when to do that, how to do that, who to contact for it. I'm just wondering, Carol, is this a new hand or is this from the previous? Okay, thank you.
I want to just add, Medha, that if you're running an anonymous survey, generally people can't withdraw consent because you don't know who they were. But in some cases, we'll run a closed survey where we're sending out invites to specific people. And in that instance, you can withdraw consent. And so we make sure that our consent form includes that information.
Thanks. This is just a quick example of a survey that we've used. An informed consent that we've used as part of one of our surveys. So we've got our client's permission to share this. So we're doing a project with Black Health Alliance and African Food Basket that is about, it's called Food is Medicine, and they provide food boxes to Black individuals and communities in Toronto that are food insecure. So this survey is for participants, and so I'll just quickly kind of go through it. So thank you for filling the survey, how the survey is going to be used. So your answers will help African Food Basket and BHA understand and improve the impact of the Food is Medicine program. So this is the participants of the program. So they already are in the program. They know about the program. And this is going out to current participants. And before you take the survey, you should know. So again, it's voluntary, how long it's going to take to complete. You agree to share your survey answers with, so AFP, BHA, us. So we're the ones that are evaluating the program. So we also get access to the data. And then there's also a research team who's part of this project and how they're going to use the data. So again, the idea is to use very simple, plain language, not use a lot of jargons, not have something that people will automatically have their eyes kind of just blur and skim over and they kind of just say okay or not okay, but something that they can actually read easily. Sangeeta?
So anyways, I'm at an organization where we've got, surveys around sociodemographics. And one of the things we've been thinking about is changing our consent so that we don't have sort of more than one like thing in our consent. So for example, you're willing to share by consenting, you're sharing your information with the Ontario government, individual clinicians and researchers. So we've been thinking about like, is it fair to bundle them all together? Because some patients were saying, or participants were saying, well, I'm okay with it going to my clinician, but not to the government. I'm okay with it going to the government, but not, I don't know, your foundation, whatever it is. So is there any sort of benefits or like, what are your thoughts on that?
I love that. That's such a great example. And this example we're sharing here doesn't do it, but we have another project running that is a collaborative project. The data that are shared or the data that are collected, in some cases, will go into a public-facing dashboard where it's not possible to identify the people who shared the data, but it's still public facing. And so there we use a multi-select consent form. And we've got it set up so that you have to choose, I think it's the first option, which is sharing the data with Logical Outcomes and the main organization collecting the data. In order to continue to the survey, you have to say, yes, I will do this. But then there's the option to click yes to sharing with additional organizations or having your data show up in this public dashboard, and you can just decline to do that. And so that's how we've done that in the past, Sangeeta.
So
Yeah, I think
Sophie, you would need quite a robust data survey collection tool to do that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and we
Okay.
have one because it's
Yeah.
what we do.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So we use something called Lime Survey, and it's
Okay.
an open source platform. If we have time, we'll talk about it at the end. But
Great.
yeah,
Would love to hear more.
you need
Yeah.
a sophisticated system in order
Great.
to do that.
Okay.
I'm just seeing the chat. Shireen said something similar that you can use checkoffs where they choose who they prefer provide consent to. And then Samantha also said that she has an example that she could share. So that's wonderful.
Yeah, that's
And we
great.
have a survey champion. That's great. We'd love to hear from you. So I'm just going to quickly go through the rest of it. So again, emphasizing that it is anonymous and confidential. And then saying that, the survey asks about things like your age, your health, your background. This is where SID comes in. Although we won't ask your name, someone who works at AFP might be able to guess who you are from your answers. Feel free to skip any questions you don't want to answer. So again, making it very clear that we are asking about this data, and the risk of identification is there, even though the survey is anonymous. So if that is something that they want to kind of avoid or they're wary of it, they don't have to fill these questions in. Again, saying that there's a chance that anonymous quotes from your response will be shared in public-facing documents or reports. Giving a very clear contact person with their contact information. So if they have any questions about the survey before, during, after, they can reach out. And then would you like to continue to the survey? And yes, if they say yes, they can click next. If they say no, then it automatically comes up with a message saying, thank you for your time. You can press exit and clear to kind of exit the survey. Um, so again, like a simple example, I'm sure a lot of us have really great examples of consent forms as well. But just to, talk about again, it's short, it's easy to read. And the other thing is that, so when we actually did this survey, it was in person, and not only did people read this, but I was also there to kind of explain it again in plain language. So again, giving people agency and choice in terms of how they go through that consent process. So also having somebody who can explain just at least the main key points very simply to people, highlighting why the survey is being done, who they can contact, how the survey data is going to be used, in person, like verbally as well, to make sure that everybody has understood before we go on. Okay. Yeah, lots of questions about Lyme survey, Sophie. Maybe we keep time for that at the end.
Yes, and our email addresses are available. Feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to demo the platform and talk about it.
Okay, gonna keep going. These are some general tips for user-centered survey design. Again, coming back to to our principle of minimizing risk and burden and treating respondents with respect. So try to minimize survey taking time, aim for 5 minutes or less. This is an average. Some people might take more, some people might take less, but keeping in mind that you want to keep your survey for 5 to 10 minutes. Use language that is clear, direct, and neutral. Keep your survey questions at a grade 8 reading level or lower to make sure it's accessible for your participants. The way that I've also done this is actually just taken my draft, like my survey draft, and put it in AI to just make sure that it is grade 8 reading level. Because sometimes you can, like for me, I was like, I'm not sure, is it not? So that's an idea that you could try, is just kind of give it to AI, give it, like it'll give you feedback, and then you can make changes if needed. Choose measures that are strengths-based and positively worded. This is really important. And we want to make sure we're using language that is appreciative. We want people to have a good experience while filling out the survey. We don't want to, use questions or language that could be triggering, or could make people uncomfortable. Especially, when we work with vulnerable populations and when you're not actually there in person to support them, you want to make sure that the language you're using is positive. I think, I'm so sorry, I forgot who shared today about the child protection services, right? Like you also spoke about how it was more deficit framing, but now it's moved towards more strengths-based measures. So I really like that. Thank you. Use help text to define any uncommon words or acronyms. So you can have something, especially when it comes to a lot of, language keeps changing and we want to make sure that we're staying up to date with language, but it can also be hard for everybody in your community to keep up to date. So having help text is helpful. And then, of course, providing language options that are relevant to the people you serve. If you are providing services to, say, newcomers, you want to make sure that you are providing your survey in like the major languages that people speak. I'm just seeing there's something in.
Yeah, Mohammed is asking about using emojis or icons or symbols, and for folks who have lower literacy levels, and we have definitely done that in the past. Not all survey platforms can support that necessarily, but many can, and I think that's a good solution. Increasingly, I'm really curious about platforms that can support like text to speech or speech to text. I know it's coming. And it would be so nice for people to be able to just have a survey, a digital survey read out to them and speak their answers and have it captured. Our system can't do that yet, but I believe there are some out there that can, and I'm sure very soon we'll have that capability so that we can make our surveys more accessible.
I think it's also nice when you're working with like younger populations to use emojis. It's just more fun for them. Okay, just looking at time, I'm gonna go through this fast. I'm sure these are also points that a lot of us already know and follow. And if you have things to add or comment about, please use the chat to do that. Okay, let's see. Okay, using survey logic, right? So respondents should only see questions that are relevant to them. So use skip logic to streamline their experience. If you are offering multiple services, people can choose what program they participated in, and then they see questions relevant to only that program. So you're making it just a little more sophisticated, easier for them to go through the survey without feeling like, oh my God, it's so long. As much as possible, give people options to not answer some questions or make questions optional. If you have to keep questions mandatory, include a prefer not to say so people can check that. Remind respondents that social demographics are optional. Include a write-in option that prefer to self-identify. So you want to make sure your options are exhaustive. And one way to do that is giving people the option to self-identify. Now, this can get tricky because when you're analyzing data, you don't want to have a lot of people who've actually written in because it just makes it harder for you to analyze. So as much as possible, provide options that people would choose from. But always, it's nice to give people the option to self-identify. Make good use of the post-submission page. I think we already spoke about that. And then very importantly, refine draft measures with the community, do pilot testing, and gather feedback. So once you have your survey measured, it's very important that you engage your staff. Maybe you have an advisory committee of community. Maybe you have some, people who you can reach out to, participants, to make sure that they have seen the survey, they review the measures, and they can give you feedback in terms of is the language working, is it accessible, and things like that. Pilot testing is also very important. If you're running the survey through, say, a desktop, a laptop, on mobile, make sure you check it in all of the different mediums and in every language. If you use, say, Google Translate or one of these translation engines, make sure that you have a native speaker actually go through it to make sure that because sometimes constructs can be tricky, right? So you want to make sure that they actually make sense to people. And this is an iterative process, right? Maybe you actually did your pilot, it was fine. But as you collect data, you're getting feedback that makes you think you need to make some changes, make those changes. These are, again, very obvious, but they're so obvious sometimes we forget. And the last one is about be alert to barriers and work to remove them. And this is all about survey administration. How are you actually administering the survey and sending it out to people, how people actually filling it up, right? So really anticipate what kind of barriers people might face when filling the survey and work to remove them. Now, training is one of them. SHIP did an amazing workshop last time, and they spoke a lot about the importance of training staff on collecting these measures, right? And how it makes the process easier, not just for participants, but also for staff, and how the quality of your data changes dramatically. So really thinking about removing these barriers, making sure that the surveys are accessible for everybody. If people need support in having a survey read out to them over the phone or in person, making sure those options are available and accessible without them having to work hard to get them. Anything else to add, Sophie?
I'll just, Pratana has added some good points about avoiding double-barrel questions and avoiding leading language. Those are really important. We didn't want to do an exhaustive set of tips for survey design, but just focus on making surveys user-centered. But there are some great resources out there, and there's one from Harvard that it's a bit old, but we like it nonetheless, and we've shared it in our list of resources. So this should be helpful in putting together things to make sure you don't do when you're writing your surveys. Okay, so just getting into, and I am aware of our time because we wanted to have a breakout room, and I'm wondering if we have time for that now, Medha. We may or may not. Let's see how quickly we can get through this material. And I am really enjoying the back and forth that we're having with folks in the chat and people raising their hands. So I would rather we keep doing that and keep this interactive rather than doing the breakout. So we may need to skip the breakout. Let's see. Okay. So in evaluation, we tend to choose, we think of our survey measures in terms of the kind of information they can gather for us and the kinds of questions they can answer. So we tend to distinguish between outcomes measures, process measures, and socio-demographic measures. There may be some other kinds that I haven't been thinking about, but those are the main three types. And while we're mostly talking about socio-demographic data collection today, we just wanted to talk a little bit about outcomes measures and process measures because they're so important to the work that we do. And I'm sure if anyone here is using surveys, they're probably asking some of these questions. A main point here is that writing good survey questions is an art and a science. It's really difficult to do well. And so wherever possible, we recommend selecting standard measures that are already out there and then potentially working with community to adapt those measures to your context if needed. So that is what we do as evaluators. We figure out what questions we need to ask. We figure out what constructs we're getting at. So what are the concepts that we really want to measure here? And then we go and we'll do a lit review usually to find out how have people asked about these things in the past, what works well, what measures are out there that have been validated with the groups that we want to hear from. And the best sources and what's available that is not, we don't need a license to use as well. And so we just wanted to share some good sources here like StatCan instruments like the Canadian Community Health Survey. There's indicator frameworks like the Quality of Life Framework for Canada. We'll just look at that a little more closely. That is a fantastic place to go for indicators of social well-being and other kinds of indicators as well. And then specialized tools that are developed by researchers and validated for use in evaluation, like the Child and Youth Resilience Measure from Michael Unger's group, I think at Dalhousie. That's a nice short strengths-based measure that can be very useful for both clinical use and program evaluation. And the nice thing about that measure is it comes with a handbook that tells you how to adapt it for your own community. So you can work with the people who are most important to your program, and you can make the changes you need in order to ensure that it's really going to gather the information that you need in a way that is responsive to community. What else did I want to say on that? Yeah. So this is what the Quality of Life Framework for Canada looks like. It's a resource that StatCan made available, I think in 2022, a couple of years ago at least, and has been developing and adding to ever since. We can maybe go to the next slide, Medha. This is an example of the kind of indicator or measure that and the kind of information that you would find on the Quality of Life Hub. So sense of belonging to local community. You've got the question at the right-hand side here. How would you describe your sense of belonging to your local community? This is an indicator that's associated, a strong sense of belonging to local community is associated with all kinds of benefits around social well-being. And so there's good reason to find out many of the programs that are offered by nonprofit organizations to find out, what impact are we having on sense of belonging? And so here we've got that question. We also know how to report on the data. So the way that StatCan reports on the data is the percentage of the population with a strong or somewhat strong sense of belonging to their local community. So it tells us what are the categories, and then how might we group those categories for reporting? What are the conventions around reporting? Because whenever we're coming up with a survey measure, we always have to think into the future, our future selves who will be reporting on the survey, on the data collected via the survey. How are we going to do that? And so going to a standard indicator like this, it gives you the answer to those questions. So I recommend it. Around process measures, there's different kinds of process measures, but the questions about process that we usually ask on a survey to participants would be around participant experience of a program. There's lots, and we like those measures to be short and clear and provide an opportunity for meaningful feedback and input. So this example here, that was something that we used with the Ontario Trillium Foundation's outcomes measurement platform. We included, I think that the scale, it's like a 3-point scale from very true to not true to try to keep this question really simple. And we wanted to give folks a chance to comment on the inclusivity of the program. How welcome did they feel? Did they feel that they were treated with respect? Did they get the help they needed in a timely way, et cetera? We also, the question below is an open text question that actually gets an impact rather than process, but I wanted to include it here because we found that it's a very powerful way to find out about the impact that your program is having on people's lives. We've seen a lot of really it's a great way to bring in testimonials. And then how can we improve our program or services whenever we have a chance, whenever we're surveying a group of people who are using a service, we always ask them this question because you don't have to hear from many people. You could hear from just one person who's having a specific issue, and then you fix that issue right away and nobody else is going to have that issue. So you don't need a great big sample size in order to be able to identify issues that need to be fixed. And this is really, as I'm saying this, I'm revealing that this is a complaints question, but it's positively worded. So we're looking for suggestions to improve. Okay, getting into sociodemographic measures. They are really hard to do well. And the reason for that is that identity categories tend to be socially constructed, so they are changeable and they shift from context to context, from one time to another time, from one place to another place. But we hold our identities closely and we feel very strongly about them, and they're an intimate part of who we are. And they are also a site of discrimination and harm, particularly for racialized groups, for Indigenous peoples. We know this story very well. But they're also a site of community building and advocacy, and they have very real and material implications for people. So it is very hard to capture this shifting, complex, and politically charged information in a way that's clear, concise, neutral, and conducive to use. So I just wanted to share those thoughts about the challenges around collecting sociodemographic information in a way that is simple and appropriate and skilled and respectful. It is really hard to do well. And what we can't do today is tell you, but we've cracked it. We've got the measures. Here they are. Nothing like that, unfortunately. It's an ongoing dialogue and a process of learning. And really, the measures that you use, they need to be dictated by the decisions that you're going to make. And so it's not a case that we can give you a gold standard. And instead, we can share some pointers and look at some different examples of the way that these questions tend to be asked. Maida, do you want to chime in at all there?
No, that was great. Thank you.
Okay. So how do we choose sociodemographic measures? Again, we would suggest choosing them, selecting them, and adapting them rather than starting from scratch and making up your own, because there's lots of measures out there. And again, critical to go back to that research question. Why do you need this information? What specific information do you need? How is it going to contribute to decision making? And just be really clear about that for yourselves and also for the people who are filling in your survey or your form. Again, you can look at measures produced by StatCan and research collaboratives and working groups, because there is ongoing work around this issue and a lot to learn that way. When refining categories, it's important to weigh the desire for many categories against the burden of a long survey question. And finally, we need always, as I was saying, to consider how we're going to report the data. So if you have 20 different identity categories, how are you going to report on that data? How can you fit all of those into a bar chart that's going to be meaningful? Maybe not. How are you going to deal with the small numbers that you'll inevitably be pulling in by asking folks to kind of choose between these many categories? And how will you deal with the fact that smaller numbers produce less statistical certainty? We are not going to answer those questions here, but we can share some answers in our next workshop when we talk about data analysis. We'll definitely talk about dealing with small response sizes then. But this is all just stuff that we like to think about when we're putting together sociodemographic measures for our survey. I know that there's some chat in here as well. But if it's okay, I want to move forward with this and then come back to the chat. I'm realizing that cognitively it's too much for me right now. So Here, I think this is a very nice diagram showing the many different types or factors, sociodemographic factors, aspects of our sociodemographic or social identity, I suppose, from Ontario Health. So to probe all of these factors in a single instrument would take a lot of time. It's really important to prioritize those identity factors that you need to learn about in order to make a decision. I know that the City of Toronto, we're going to look at an example from the City of Toronto in a minute that was produced through the first iteration of this project. And I believe the City of Toronto, at least the document that I found from 2022, identified, I think it was 10 different elements of different measures of different socio-demographic measures as core and 7 as optional for use by programs that are City of Toronto programs. And that's one way that you can approach it. But we just want to say it's important to figure out what exactly do you need to know with this survey and just ask those questions.
Again, just to add something to that, like what exactly do you need to know and in how much detail? Right?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
when you're asking a particular question, like what level of detail do you need to know in the response of that question to actually make a decision? Is it okay to have like maybe like 3 broad categories are enough for you to make that decision, or do you really need to know like each and everything? So again, the questions you choose and the categories within each question might vary based on the purpose of doing the survey. Okay.
Okay, so we wanted to give some examples of questions that ask about race we have 4 different examples to look at because these kinds of questions get asked in different ways by different organizations or for different purposes. So I'm aware of time and I want to move through it fairly quickly, but I thought let's start with StatCan because that's the gold standard in some respects, but it's really interesting. StatCan doesn't actually ask explicitly about race. They have this race question, but this is part of the census of population, and it is asked, I think, on every round. StatCan is working very hard, I know, to improve the way that they ask these questions, but some of the categories here are a little bit surprising, and the reason that these categories are included, it's a little bit obscure, but it relates to the Employment Equity Act, and those categories were developed in the 1980s, and then they've basically been enshrined in the Employment Equity Act, so StatCan has to ask these questions, it seems. On their surveys, hopefully not in perpetuity, but this is what they're doing. Now, there are things I personally like about this question in that it doesn't have a million different categories. It's a somewhat limited number of categories. Yes, it's a little confusing. Why are they asking all of these in this particular way? Some of them seem to be clear enough that they don't need examples. Some have examples. It is always a little jarring to see white at the top of a list of racial identities. In this case, StatCan is using the percentage of the population that identifies with each of these groups from the previous census. And so the order of these groups actually changes over time as our demographic shift in Canada. One thing I wanted to pull out here is that that StatCan has complicated rules around who is classified as a visible minority. So if you click on, and this is a multi-select, I want to point out, which is important, but if you click on anything, you choose anything other than white, then you are placing yourself in the population group visible minority. Visible minority is old-fashioned language. We don't tend to use it anymore. It's although it may not itself be a problem, a hurtful term, it's nonetheless a term that makes us think about the way that our society thought about race 30 years ago. And so it's not an adequate term. It is a woefully inadequate term. And when you choose, when you click or choose your the identity or the racial category, let's say that you most identify with, StatCan isn't telling you now we're going to count you as a visible minority. That I think is an issue frankly. But that's how the reporting works right now. So I wanted to share that because we tend to look at StatCan. There's things we can learn from this, things we could take for our own forms, but there's places where we would probably want to depart from StatCan's model here. Now this question is from the City of Toronto. It has a different kind of introduction, a longer introduction, which we've put on the left. And I'm aware that I believe that this measure was developed through a previous round of this project. Looking at this, I can see the effort to make each of these categories clear and to also explain I think it doesn't exactly explain why the question is being asked, but it does say, we understand that this list of identifiers may not exactly match how you would describe yourself. We're doing our best here. I think that's important. So this list is alphabetical, and there's effort to explain what each of these categories means. But it ends up being a lot of text. So it ends up, looking at this, it's quite a lot of text to confront as a survey taker. And the way that folks who identify with more than one category the way that their data is handled is interesting. So it's sort of a subset, and then you can pick more than one. And that is, I would love to learn how the City of Toronto analyzes that data, because it's not immediately apparent to me. I think it would be beyond our capabilities, Medha, honestly, to figure out how to report on that data. But then again, we tend to work with nonprofits who may serve thousands of people. The City of Toronto is home to millions of people. And so we're looking at very different population sizes. And you can have more categories when you're asking a larger group of people. Maybe my thinking isn't totally clear there, but anyway, it's interesting to look at this question. I want to also just mention that not listed, please describe is shared. That's a write-in answer. It's open, and there's the prefer not to answer given here. Let's move on, although I'm happy for folks to be commenting in the chat as we're looking at these.
Yeah, I was also just thinking, there's no separate Indigenous identity question for this one.
This is interesting because the city does ask about Indigenous identity in a previous question, just as StatCan does. So it's Indigenous identity is asked about and belonging to First Nations, Inuit, or Métis nations. But then it is asked again here, and it's asked in a way that's a little confusing, where Inuit is given as an example of First Nations. That may have changed. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know. I know there's folks from the city here. So please feel free to put it into the chat. That's likely has changed. But it does mean that people who identify as that Indigenous people are being asked twice about their identity. That's something I would avoid. I would probably hide this question and not include Indigenous as an option, and just ask about Indigenous identity separately. So I'd hide it for people who said yes, that their identity, that they are Indigenous. This is an example from Ontario Health. We're moving through here. We've got just one more. And this is, it's interesting, Ontario, this is from the Anti-Racism Directorate. Here the question is about racialized group rather than about race. But then the word race group is also used within the body of the question. You can see how different organizations are working to try to ask these questions in the best way that they can. This is quite clear, and it's alphabetical order. There's an opportunity to select more than one, to write in another group, to say that you don't know or that you prefer not to answer. So depending on the reason you want to gather data and what exactly you want to gather, that might be a useful question for you. And we've shared each of these sources again. Now, this is a question that we've used on a survey in the past. At the top of our page where we asked about sociodemographics, we just remind people that these questions are here to help us understand the people we serve. They're voluntary. If you don't want to answer a question, just skip it, or you can say prefer not to answer. This was for a group who who serves the population in a remote rural part of Ontario. It's not a population that has a lot of ethnic diversity. They want to understand the outcomes of the different population groups that they serve. And so this question is being used, first of all, to look at, to some extent, to ensure that their survey sample is representative as part of a suite of other demographic questions, but it's also used to disaggregate outcomes data. And so here they've just, the way that we've shown, the way we've dealt with this is just by, rather than having 5 different questions about different demographic categories, we've put the groups of most interest, whose outcomes are of most interest to this organization, into a multi-select question. So you can select multiple categories here, or if you choose none of the above, then the other categories cannot be selected. And that's a way to reduce the burden of survey taking. It makes it much quicker to move through the survey, but it's not perfect. And I've definitely heard from folks who don't like this way of asking about of putting different demographic categories into the same question. We wanted to share it as an option.
Thanks, Sophie. Okay, I'm gonna go on. We're not gonna do the breakout room. I think we'll just go on.
But we can do our dance when we get off the call.
Thanks. Oh, sorry, my thing got stuck. Okay. Yeah, and if folks have any sort of comments that they have about, I know we showed, like a variety of different examples, and we're not saying that, oh, one is the only way to do it. But if you have any comments, maybe of how you collect, data on these questions, any challenges you've experienced, or some things that you recommend, please feel free to use the chat. I'm just going to quickly, we just have one last section left, which is about selecting a survey platform. Just some, people often ask, what kind of tool should we use? And there are a lot of options out there. So we just wanted to highlight a few things to look out for when you're making that choice. First one is privacy and security. So checking that it meets compliance with regulations, whatever sort of, if you're collecting, say, health data or things like that, that it meets the regulations you need. We think about protection of personal information. Is there possibility of role-based access? So who has access to that data? Can people have access based on the roles in your team? Not everybody needs to have access to the data, right? Like not everybody in your whole organization needs access to that. So clarifying those things. Do you have control over how long the data is kept? Can you delete the data? And can you control where the data is hosted, where the servers are? So like Lime Survey, for instance, has an option where you can self-host. So if you have the requirement of being on, like, say, Canadian servers or having your own sort of server, it's possible with some platform, not with all of them. Customizability. So can you have survey logic in it? Is it possible to have the option of an other? And can you actually label that? So we don't often say other, we'll say prefer to self-identify. We can change the name of that label. It's not possible in all survey platforms, right? So thinking about what are your platform needs. How many question types does it have? We know that some of the, like, Google Forms is really, really common, right? Google Forms, MS Forms, but the options they have in terms of advanced questions or logic or having an other option tend to be a lot more limited. Accessibility. So can you have the survey in multiple languages? Is it responsive on different devices? Is it easy to read? Is it like nice to look through? Like some surveys look so nice, you kind of just want to keep going. But some of them, if it's a little jarring, or if there are like issues with color, with font size, you may not want to go through with it. Cost effective. Do they offer a discount for nonprofits? What is the cost per user for your team? How many people need a license? How much would it cost? This again would vary based on, your organization. Is there compatibility with existing processes and systems? So how easily can I integrate the data into maybe a current system that I have, like my client management system, or into like my Microsoft Workspace or my Google Suite or whatever I have? How easy is it for me to integrate this data? And is there an option for advanced analytics or a dashboard? I'm sure there are more things to look at, but we kind of made a list of what we thought was more important. And I would also say somewhat in order of importance, like you want to look at privacy first. The advanced analytics are a good to have, but they may not be a need to have. And then we also, again, this is definitely not comprehensive. I know there are a lot of other survey platforms. Somebody mentioned Qualtrics, it's also really great and very useful for larger organizations because it does tend to be more expensive. But we made just a quick list of the most popular survey platforms. And again, it's not super comprehensive, but what are some strengths and limitations? So we know Google Forms is really popular and it's free. So that's amazing. It's free. You've got unlimited responses. You can easily integrate into your Google Sheets, etc. But it does offer very limited customization and question types. It doesn't have very advanced analytics. I realize we have 2 minutes left. So what we can also do is kind of maybe share this in the community of practice that we're going to be having, which is the next workshop. But just to kind of say that there are a lot of different options, and just thinking about some of these sort of criteria when you're evaluating and choosing a survey platform can be helpful. Just to make sure that, because social identity data collection can require you to have complex logic or complex survey question options, making sure you're choosing what is the best for your organization. And if you have, like Sophie said, if you have any questions about these or you want to discuss any of these in more detail, especially Lime Survey, which is the one that we use, please reach out to us and we'd be happy to take you through Lime Survey or answer any more questions.
We have a survey that we want you to fill in.
These are just some
So-
helpful resources. When the slides are uploaded, you can
Mhm.
have a look. And yes.
Yeah, do we have the link to, I think I can grab the link to this and
This
stick it
is a
into,
very quick feedback form about the workshop. We'd love to hear about your experience from the workshop, how we can improve the workshops going forward.
yeah.
It's a quick
And
anonymous survey.
I put the link into the chat, and we don't ask any socio-demographic questions on this forum. Thanks so much, everybody. It was wonderful to have an interactive conversation with you all.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for everybody participating so nicely, and for all of us to learn from each other. There's a lot of cool things in the chat, so I'm looking forward to getting into that.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
As people are leaving, Amita, I wish we would have had a chance to talk about other demographic categories and good ways, good examples that we've liked. But I think what we can do is do that in the community of practice meeting that's coming up, for folks who are still here and would like to take part in that meeting. We can share that information.
It would be so interesting to talk about like gender and sexual identity
Yeah.
questions. That would be really helpful. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Wonderful session.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Oh, I can't remember how to leave on Zoom.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. And Keishan, thank you for answering everyone's questions about registering.
Sorry, I have a quick question. Oh, it's in the chat right now. Okay, thank you. Bye.
And we have to complete the survey about this survey, right?
I would appreciate it, but you don't have to. It's entirely voluntary.
I
Okay,
want to mention as well that when there is some like a small gift card or something, it's all. I mean, not for this survey, but for any others. It helps a lot. It's encouraging people to participate.
Yeah, it's true. I wish we'd had a little more time because we could have talked about that. It does. But you want to set that gift card at the right level. I've seen cases where it was set too high, and then there was like cheating, and it didn't go well. So it's a case of figuring out what's the right amount to offer in compensation for people's time and to say thank you. and how to do it well.
Maybe we can bring that up at the community of practice as well. I think it's a big one for our sector around the compensation.
Yeah.
And I've often, there's always like that standard, but it'd be great to share that story around the too high and too low.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you.